There's a new number one in Brandon Marcello's college football power rankings this week. Miami back on top after getting leapfrogged by Ohio State and Oregon a week ago. Canes beating Florida State and Tallahassee in one of the only two ranked-on-ranked matchups here in Week 6. Brandon, though, on the same page as voters, leaving Texas and Penn State off his list. So let's bring in Brandon Marcello, who puts the power rankings together, and Danny Kanell from the Cover 3 podcast. Canes back at number one in your penthouse. Brandon, take me through it here.
Yeah, I made the mistake of dropping them out of the number one spot last year. Everybody thought that win from Oregon at Penn State was monstrous. Well, it ended up being a monster hiding in the closet because Penn State lost to UCLA, as we all know, in an historic loss. And I'm not saying Oregon's not a great team, but for right now, when you consider the resume and you look at the power rankings and the opponents and also the analytics that's involved with Miami and what they've been able to do, Miami, to me, is the number one team, inching out Ohio State. The Hurricanes look like a complete team. They have got a defense that has been phenomenal. They've got an offense that has every weapon possible that you need to contend and win a championship. They got up 28-3 at Florida State. That final score is deceiving because they kind of let off the brakes a little bit and then also kind of played back some maybe not necessarily prevent coverage, but allow Tommy Castellanos to throw a lot of stuff underneath to get some chunk plays, and they came back to make that a 6-point game. But Miami really was in control from start to finish, and I've been really impressed with them throughout this year. And it seems to me that they've been getting better week to week. And Carson Beck at quarterback, how beautiful were the throws that he made Saturday night in Tallahassee. I think he erased any doubts about people maybe him having less zip on the ball or even not being able to complete some passes downfield. He's got tremendous receivers. Miami is the most complete team in the country right now in my eyes.
I think so too, Brandon. I mean, they were so impressive. They passed the eye test up front when you look at the offensive and defensive line. Then they back it up with production, able to run the football extremely well. And when they can't, they're able to protect Carson Beck. That was a question for me because that was their first time outside of Hard Rock Stadium. They go into a hostile environment, silence that crowd pretty early in that game, and they've won different ways, right? Sometimes it's Mark Fletcher getting it done on the ground like it was on Saturday night. All of a sudden it's C.J. Daniels and Malachi Toney through the air, and Carson Beck is playing such clean football right now. Beautiful, beautiful deep balls. He's getting yards after the catch on the underneath stuff. Phenomenal. The only thing I think that would hold this team back potentially from winning a national championship is kind of what you talked about, because in the Notre Dame game, they looked way better, and yet they only won by a field goal. This game, they looked way better, and yet they only win by one possession. Mario's tendency to get more conservative with the lead, I think, is something to keep an eye on. It shouldn't matter with the schedule the way it's front-loaded. They've gone through their gauntlet completely unscathed. They've got a couple mulligans to play with. They should be favored all the way to Charlotte to the ACC championship game. But down the road, it's the one question mark that still remains about this team. Mario Cristobal, game management, conservative nature, want to kind of control things when you have a lead. That could come back to bite them, but it hasn't so far, and they look really, really good.
Just for fun, I pinged my buddy Todd Furman, former Vegas odds maker. I said, hey, Miami, Ohio State on a neutral, what would you make it? He said Buckeyes minus 1.3. So basically that close between these two teams, even though we're entering Week 7. You always want to keep tabs on how those things go. Texas Tech remains undefeated. Guys, they had that statement win against Utah. They go into Houston, hold the Cougs to 11 points. Brandon leading the Big 12 in a big way.
Yeah, number 2 scoring offense in the country, and they have a top 10 defense when it comes to total defense. They've been shutting down opponents. They've won 5 straight games by more than 20 points. They are legit. They are the Big 12 favorite. I love the way they've obviously have stacked that offense and the defense through the transfer portal. That's been talked about ad nauseum, as we know, with the big bucks that they're throwing around there at the NIL this past offseason. But this is a team that should not really be all that tested all that much, except for maybe 2 more games remaining on their schedule in the Big 12. We know that conference, much like the ACC, can get crazy, and sometimes there's some weird upsets from time to time. But this Texas Tech team is built different from the ones we've seen in the past that have won the Big 12 championship. They're doing it with defense, but also with offense. My thing is, though, for them is that what happens if they kind of slow down a little bit offensively, because they're not going to continue to be able to, I think, score points at will as much as they are right now, because they're going to go against some better defenses. Also, I just keep an eye on Baron Morton at quarterback. He's had a history of some injuries here in the past, so they've got to keep him healthy. But those are the things I'm only concerned about. It's things that might happen. But to me, right now, this team is absolutely the favorite to win in the Big 12. And for me, maybe the best team in the state of Texas. And for right now, I do believe they are.
Yeah, it's hard to push back against that. Joey McGuire's done a phenomenal job pulling this team together with all those moving parts, the transfer portal pieces coming together and competing as one. That's not easy to do. We see a lot of teams that major in the portal and it comes up flat and all of a sudden the season comes apart at the seams. They've been anything but that. To the Baron Morton point, it's got to feel pretty good that you do have some depth at the position, because remember at Utah, he went out of the game, wasn't having his best game. Will Hammond steps in and takes over, and they don't lose a beat on the offensive side of the ball. But I do think the biggest improvement on this team is they've had solid quarterback play, offensive production in the last few years, but the defense with guys like Romello Height and David Bailey brought in through the portal has been the most impressive part of this Texas Tech team. They clearly are one of the best teams in the country. And you mentioned, I think the next 2 weeks are critical for them. Kansas, and then they have to go to Arizona State against one of the other top teams, the playoff representative from the Big 12 last year. Kenny Dillingham, will have that team in a frenzy? It'll be one of their biggest challenges yet. But they had a big challenge on the road at Rice-Eccles, and they answered that one with flying colors. So I think Texas Tech is that team to beat in the Big 12, and it should be a fun finish.
So, Brandon, you established how bullish you are on the Red Raiders in the state of Texas, but what about A&M right now, one spot behind? What's the gap for you there?
Yeah, the gap for me is that Texas Tech just seems to be a little bit more sound defensively from what we've seen. They had a huge win this week. I think that maybe we're underplaying, actually, how big of a win that was against Mississippi State. We're kind of stuck in the past with the Bulldogs. But this Mississippi State team pushed Tennessee, a legit top 15 team, to the brink, and maybe should have won that game against the Volunteers. That offense has been very explosive. Their defense is much improved from last season. And A&M was playing kind of in a tight battle for about 2.5 quarters against Mississippi State, and then blew them out there near the end and kind of put their feet down on their throats. I really like this A&M team. Marcel Reed obviously has changed the dynamic of things there at quarterback, but defensively, they're getting a lot of pressure, a lot of tackles for loss. They're one of the better teams in tackling the ball carriers, and of course, their quarterbacks behind the line of scrimmage. I just need to see maybe a little bit more consistency from the second and third levels of that Texas A&M defense, but they are for certain a very deserving team in the top 10. They're undefeated, but that schedule is only going to get tougher from here on out. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but this week's game against Florida is actually very, very concerning for me because of the way Florida obviously has played defense all season, but also they're riding a high now after beating Texas. They've got that belief back in them. Going on the road is going to be a totally different animal there, though, in College Station. A&M, very tough road to hoe, but what a start for them at 5-0.
So they needed a couple things happen, Brandon, for them to kind of get to this point. One was Mike Elko taking over that defense, right? He was the head coach, still is, but then he took more of an ownership over the defense. That looks like it's worked. The other thing they really did was Marcel Reed to take a step forward. And he even called out some of his critics this offseason saying, hey, y'all don't think I can throw the football. I'm going to show you how much better I'm going to be this season. And I do think an entire offseason working with Colin Klein, their offensive coordinator, has done wonders, as well as getting two of the best portal receivers that we saw this season. Casey Concepcion and Mario Craver have been outstanding finds. And then all of a sudden, they're starting to get some depth at running back. We knew about Le'Veon Moss. He's a little bit quiet this past weekend, and Reuben Owens goes off and steps up. So I think it's all coming together really nicely for the Aggies. The one question is, I feel like we've seen this before. Like, they've had these fast starts. Now they need to finish when that schedule gets a lot tougher. But right now, they look like they could be. I think it's Bama and A&M and Missouri sort of at the top of the SEC, and they're very much in that conversation.
Let's finish up with Penn State and Texas. Preseason 1 and 2, not even ranked this week, guys. And Danny, I'll give you Texas, but Brandon, I'm going to give you Penn State first. That loss at the Rose Bowl to UCLA, what's the potential fallout for James Franklin? What are you hearing there? And just thoughts of the Nittany Lions?
I know a lot of my colleagues have said, hey, maybe it's time for James Franklin to look for other jobs, and I seem to agree with that. I mean, listen, Penn State's not going to buy him out or even consider firing him, one, because his buyout's so large at about $50 million, but also I think he's just absolutely reached his limit at Penn State at this point. I mean, he hasn't even beaten a power conference opponent yet, as we know, and losing to UCLA, I think, was just the final nail in the coffin there. This was supposed to be the season, right? Last year, maybe he actually was a better team than this version this year, where everybody came back practically, and they ended up hiring the most expensive defensive coordinator in the country in Jim Knowles from Ohio State. All the pieces were there for them not only to win the Big Ten, but also win a national championship. And here they are with 2 losses before even a month and a half into the season. You know, listen, I think James Franklin is very much like a high floor coach. He's always going to be very consistent. You know, the bottom is never really going to be too bad. But right now, when you've got all that talent and everything in place to contend for a championship, and this is the result you're providing to the fans there at Penn State, I think he's reached his limit there. And it's only going to be downhill from here. I'm not talking about ruining legacy and anything like that at Penn State, but it's just going to be frustrating and frustrating. It's going to be like being married to someone that you hate for the next several years until an inevitable end. If I'm James Franklin, this is about as good as it's probably going to get for you as far as trying to find another job out there. Maybe it's time to look around the scene here, because it's going to be an historic coaching carousel cycle. There are going to be a lot of jobs open and a lot of jobs in the SEC, where he's already coached at Vanderbilt. I think this is an opportunity for him to get out and to make everybody happy.
Yeah, the Penn State one has been a shocker for me. Texas is not that surprising to me personally. I thought they'd be 9-3, this season because of a new quarterback in Arch Manning. As much as the hype that was up there, I just thought it would be more of a roller coaster ride for him. But even saying that, I didn't think it would be as bad as it's been and more of a struggle for Arch. But he did play enough. I thought he played good enough to win on Saturday in Gainesville with a couple nice plays. I know he missed a couple passes and had a couple interceptions. But to me, the biggest surprise was Texas's defense, who that's where you're supposed to say defense travels, right? That's kind of a cliche that has proven true for great football teams across the country. And they at times looked like they couldn't get off the field as Florida was carving them up. And Jaden Bogg goes off for 27 carries, 107 yards, and that touchdown. And DJ Lagway, who has struggled mightily all season long, has his best performance of the day against your defense, which, again, I mentioned was supposed to be one of the best in the country. That was supposed to be your strong suit. Now you can't really mask those issues on the offensive side of the ball. So it's all sort of culminating in this season that's been short of expectations, which I thought were way too lofty. Now they got to get ready for Red River, a game they should win against Michael Hawkins, a backup quarterback for Oklahoma. But I think the bumpiness is just getting started for Texas. I still think they're not a playoff team. They'll have to prove me wrong in order to do that because they've got too many replacements. They have too many issues and questions they had to answer. Primarily at quarterback was the number one, but now you're starting to see some other deficiencies as well, which I think are cause for concern for Texas.
Crazy, the first 6 weeks of the season, all this changed. All right, check out that entire power rankings list at CBSSports.com for Brandon and the cover 3 for Danny, Bud Elliott, Tom Fornelli, Chip Patterson. They were in Tallahassee for Miami and Florida State. By the way, one last button up on these two teams. First time since 1967, the top 2 teams in the preseason AP poll, both unranked.